understand how they work, and then Holly's going to talk about a very bright picture of fiscal 2019, and depending on how optimistic we are. So we look at that, and I think one of the things, as you look at that, and you look at the out years, obviously there are projections, but it's not a very good trend. It's something we started talking about last year within where we're headed. The other thing we'll do, a small group of us met on Tuesday afternoon or late afternoon to talk about, and we'll update you on what our trying to have a strategy. We did, I think, a much better job last year, but to improve upon that, how we communicate outside of this room, outside of meeting with the county executive and the press, and then we have a meeting with the council. But the way to get this information out more, so that there's more discussion and more knowledge within the county of what our revenues are and what our expenses are, and how do we come to terms with those things from a real standpoint versus open something. So we're going to try to do that. So, debt measure.
I think Holly's first.
Oh, hi.
I don't know where she went.
Holly left. Okay. We'll wait for
We're gonna have to revamp a little bit.
We should, I think we should get completed by about 8:30, and then a small group are going to meet with some of the county people to talk about some other things we might like to do. We have a lot to do to get this report out. Okay, so there'll be a lot of wordsmithing. I think we can get today through a good discussion on expenses and what we can spend next year, what our projections should be there. We can get at least a good handle on next year. We don't have Dr. Flinch's report until next week, because he's making money in arbitration. So we'll do that, but we can, I think we get a good handle on borrowing, a good handle on regional fiscal and expense recommendations as well to the college. I thought you I think the debt measures are good because it sort of gives a framework of what.
Yep.
I'm just trying to give Holly some time to prepare.
Good morning. My name is Nikki Griffith. I'm in the Department of Finance, and I manage the debt for the county. So on the items that we'll go over first are the measures that are in the county's debt management policy. So we'll go over where we stand with all of those 4 measures. And then our debt measure projections, where we think we're going to be based on where we think we're going to be issuing debt, and we can get into that. Also our fund balance. We've been working on some different ways to look at our fund balance, and then our always favorite authorized but unissued funds. So the first measure is debt as a percent of our assessable base. So the county charter limits it to 4.8% of assessed value. And that includes real and personal property. We've also been trying to align our debt measures with what the 3 credit rating agencies look at when they're giving us a rating. So this measure is still considered by S&P and Moody's. All of the credit rating agencies have been revamping how they look at debt, but this is still a relevant measure. So as you can see, our assessable base has been increasing, as well as our outstanding general obligation debt. So we're well below the 4.8% there. Our second measure is the debt measured against population on a per capita basis. So our population continues to grow over the past 5 years, as well as our outstanding debt. So it did spike a little bit last year, but we expect that it will continue to decline going forward. And then measure number 3 is the per capita debt as a percent of per capita income. So historically, a limit of 10% was consistent with AAA rated counties. This is no longer a measure that the credit rating agencies look at, unfortunately, because it was a very good one for us, because we have a wealthy county. And measure number 4 is debt service as a percent of current revenues. The goal is to keep debt service to 10% or less. This is a measure that S&P considers in their credit rating, but the other 2 agencies do not. But debt service as a percent of revenue, it's hovering around 9% historically.
We might add, with the courthouse, that will spike up to just over 10% for about, I think it was 2 years, and then it'll come back down.
Nikki, I have a question, as I mentioned to you before. So that we put the fire tax revenue in here, and we put in environmental services funds. Wouldn't it be more transparent to take fire tax revenue out and the corresponding debt service and just have general fund?
I would just say that the reason that we started doing it this way is to, again, be more consistent with how the credit rating agencies look at it. And so when they're considering our revenues and our debt, this is the way that they're calculating the measure. And we wanted to be consistent with how it was presented in our rating reports and how it's presented here.
And I think, Craig, I remember the conversation we had a couple of years ago on this, and the feeling was other counties didn't have fire tax.
Right.
They just had it in the general, so it was appropriate to include the fire tax because in effect, that was the choice Howard County made, is how they collect that money versus other, if we did it the way other counties do, it would just be part of the general fund.
Right, but the difference is, we've got specific debt service that if you look at our budget, we transfer out of the fire tax fund to pay that specific debt service. So if you take both of those out, it's going to increase that percentage if you just use general fund money.
I think actually it's going to decrease slightly, because this is just technology, the technical issue we just talked about there. Because currently what's happened is fire tax supported debt services already captured in general fund, but then the funding that's supported by fire tax also transferred to general fund.
Right.
So it's capturing both debt service and the revenues in general fund. In some other counties, those parts, both expenditure and revenue, are peeled off to those individual funds.
Right.
So you're going to take it out from both debt service and the revenue piece. So the calculation is going to come out very similar result. You usually have a slightly net decrease for the data. That's what, there's some counties doing the way we do, there's other counties doing differently there. This is not going to change the bottom line. Actually, if we do the change you just talk about, I think it's actually is going to show data slightly better. It's just like if you do net or gross, but currently you have to do apples to apples, which we're doing. So both the transferring of revenue and the transferring of debt service, we all capture different. But it's not going to change the bottom line.
Right.
But is this something that S&P is looking for, or is this just something that we're doing as a matter of practice?
I don't think they have a specific guidance about which way to do it. Nobody ever questioned it.
So now we move on to the projections. So for the first debt measure, based upon our current assumptions, which are listed at the bottom, we're assuming 95 million, give or take, for annual debt issuance beginning in FY 2023. Because the bonds for the courthouse are expected to be issued in FY 2021 and FY 2022. And the bringing down of the authorized but unissued bonds, that will continue through FY 22 also. So we are assuming a 4.5% interest rate And then the assessable base projections were estimate. So you can see that it actually is projected to decrease going forward, despite the increasing outstanding debt. And then we also projected debt measure number 4. This is the one that Steve referenced. So we do expect that for 4 years, we would spike over 10% if this is assuming no refundings to try to bring down the debt service.
Refundings usually happen in a recent interest rate environment.
No. We because we try to shorten our call dates and allow us to call the bonds sooner, we can continue to, depending on how the bonds were structured. Some of them have a lower coupon in the out years, so it still allows us.
Talk to us, Nikki, a little bit about your assumption of the 4.5% interest rate.
So currently, we are below 4%, and we issue bonds at a 5% coupon, but we also get a premium on the bond, so it relates to an interest rate below 5% for us. And so we've been tracking well below 4%, so this is still factoring in an increase. And just, yep.
So the 120 million for 19 is a big increase versus what we just saw.
So, okay, that actually leads well into what I was just going to mention, is that when we issued our bonds in March, our regular bond sale, we had a refunding component to that. And also as part of the tax package that passed before the end of the year, they took away the possibility of advance refunding of tax-exempt bonds. So we snuck ourselves in another refunding before we didn't have the opportunity anymore. And the way we did it was that we structured it to get some of the savings in the earlier years, a lot of it in this year. So so that's why there's a spike from 18 going forward.
Is that, my recollection was when we went to the council and to the county executive, that we were looking at being over 10% only 2 years in the courthouse. So can you talk about why that?
Next slide.
Yeah, that's the.
I always that slide.
So part of why it's expected to cap is there's a temporary revenue slowdown expected in FY 2019, which you mentioned as part of Holly's. And primarily we expect that related to income tax planning, and because the lower base revenue that we multiply our growth on, that sort of flows all the way through all of the projections. And then higher bond issuance amounts are expected through FY 2022, and that's as the authorized but unissued bonds. We're really focusing on if we don't need the bond authorization, then we remove it from the capital budget, and then we worked with the departments to really find out when they're going to be spending the money, so we know when we think we will actually issue the bonds.
And just so I'm going to switch to roads for a second, because we have that great unmet need. We can't move them to roads if we don't bond roads because they're shorter term. So we can't, we say we have that windfall, there's a good use for it, but in reality, you can't because bonds are 5 years. I mean, the roads.
Well, we
you
can't
gotta repave.
repave roads,
Yeah.
but we can, if they expand the
Because
capacity,
reconstruction.
then we can do that. And then also the bonds for the courthouse are expected to be issued in FY 21 and FY 22. That's when we would make the milestone payment. And then as the 10% threshold is projected to be exceeded temporarily, we've discussed this at length with our financial advisor, and they don't expect that it would impact the county's credit rating because it is temporary, and the fact that we are so forward-thinking and looking at it and knowing that it's coming and thinking of ways to try to minimize it. So, that's a plus for us. Now, this is some other measures that aren't part of the debt management policy, but Moody's and S&P do look at the outstanding debt as a percent of current revenues, as opposed to the debt service to current revenues. So currently, the county falls in the single A category, which is between 60 and 120%. And you can see that we're well below the 120%, but going forward, we will get inch closer to the 60%, possibly getting to a better rating category.
That's a long time down the stream.
It is.
to that.
It is. It is.
Yes.
But we're always looking for improvement.
When the time, from the time that bonds are authorized, is there a window or that they have to be sold before you have to go back for?
So the authorization lasts for 4 years, but we do have the possibility to reauthorize. So each year, as part of the capital budget, we'll authorize new bonds, and there's also a component of reauthorizations. That's generally around 50 million, I believe.
50?
50, yes. So, and I will say it used to be 90. So the fund balance criteria, this is one that, that is usually commented on in our credit opinions from the rating agencies. So you can see that Moody's, when we did our refunding in December, did note that we had below average reserve ratios. But we are slowly climbing up. But you can see here on the left, these are the other AAA counties surrounding us. And so we are slightly below the peer average. And so this is just something that we try to keep in our mind and work towards improving. Our FA did suggest that we pursue some ways to increase the available portion of our fund balance. And you'll see on the next slide that we actually, getting there. This year, we did, of course, have to dip into some of our reserve funds to cover the flood in Ellicott City and the recovery. But we had budgeted to use $20.7 million of reserves. Our revenues came in better than expected by nearly $16 million. Our expenditures were under. So actually, we only had to draw down $2.6 million of the $20 million that we expected. So, so really, we turned out much better than expected. And the fact that we were able to do that is something that the credit rating agencies really look highly upon. They want our flexibility in when we have some type of revenue that pops up and is less than expected, that we can handle those types of things. And here we go, S&P says our budget flexibility. And also Fitch says that they expect that if something would happen, like weak revenue that we might expect in FY19, that we will have the reserves available to help us weather any shocks to the system. And over here is just how Moody's looks at a single A is 15% to 5%. And S&P a strong is 8 to 15%. And I'll just point out that the areas that have the AAA for the fund balance, it usually was Alaska because of their huge amount of tax revenue from oil, which is now not so much. So maybe they'll adjust this now that we don't have that outlier. And then here is the authorized but unissued bonds that we've been mentioning. So back in FY 2016, at the end of the fiscal year, it was $980 million. When it came to the end of FY 17, we had brought it down a little, about $100 million. And then you can see that, of course, we authorized $105 million for the courthouse P3 bonds. So we didn't make much progress. Yeah, we basically reduced it by 100, added 100. But then in FY19, assuming a $95 million authorization, then it would.
Where did you get that?
We're just throwing that out there because my next slide. That's generally around the average. It's still less than the average of 99, but we're in 93.
That's taking how many years at 120?
So that's 2 years, and then it also factors in the 200 from last year because of the courthouse. And then you can see that the average issuance was 85, but here we have been increasing in 17 and 18 because we are trying to take care of that authorized but unissued, that pending liability that was out there that we weren't quite sure about. And so we did work with Public Works and the departments and really get a handle on forecasting all this, so we appreciate your question. You got us thinking. That is all I have, unless anyone, yes?
Quick question, and I'll probably leading the witness for a later conversation. Your financial advisor said that it would be okay if we spiked over 10% for a 4-year period. Does that advisor have any guidance as to what point we would reach where we would get a little bit of trouble?
They did not give us specifics as of years.
I'm really thinking more the way of number.
Oh, they had indicated like a 12% would be reasonable, as long as we were trying to increase our fund balance at the same time. But we are not even going to get to 11%, so.
And again, for the committee, our looking at that 10%, all relates to debt service as a percentage of that operating budget relative to county needs, and to be honest, county needs education, but well beyond education, because that's what gets squeezed in this county. So it's making sure we have enough revenue in the general fund to deal with the services in the county. And so it doesn't matter whether they say 12%, because if we were 12%, we'd have a really big problem relative to services. Yes.
I'm embarrassed that I don't understand some of the math here, because it's my business. So we issue 100 million at a premium.
So-
How much money do we get, and where does it go, and what do we pay back?
So there's two options when you receive a premium. So one is that if I need $100 million to reimburse myself for my projects, and I get a $10 million premium, I'll only borrow $90 million. And all that, the $10 million premium and the $90 million borrowed go back into our coffers to reimburse us for the $100 million.
Is that what we do?
That is what we did. The other option is that you still issue $100 million worth of bonds, you take that $10 million and you pay debt service with it, which is what the state does and is not recommended.
I can add to that real quickly. Some other counties, that's a good question. They will actually appropriate that as a revenue source in the following year, the premium.
But then that's a one-time revenue source and you're sort of band-aiding your budget.
Just do it every year.
That is the interest rate decline.
You don't always get that.
Yeah, that's what's been declining,
But it
so.
really is a one
Yeah, so
revenue
they're,
source, is what it is.
If we kind of look out into the future, we haven't talked about rising interest rates for quite some time, but clearly we're heading in that direction. So what's kind of the current thinking to take advantage of existing rates today to perhaps issue some of the authorized but unissued debt?
well, historically, the county issues bonds after we've already incurred the costs, as opposed to issuing in advance. We do have a short-term line of credit, and so we get a much better interest rate using that until we issue bonds. I think our rate is like 60 basis points right now, as opposed to the 4.5% that we're issuing at. So we still think that that's the best way to handle the interest at this point.
And that should all, I mean, even as interest rates go up, that delta should be a ratio that should remain somewhat consistent. So thank you, Nikki. Great answers. Okay. Holly's son, or her report, we call Miss Sunshine.
Cool.
No pressure, Holly.
So, a few weeks ago, I did really quick update about where we are at that point, and then I just want to add some new information as well as some fine-tune FY19 revenue projections for the committee, and also multi-year projections that reflect some collaboration with the components. Immediate savings here, as we are already aware of, the county was facing about $7 million revenue shortfall in FY18, and it's primarily driven by a one-time shock on the income tax side here, associated with tax planning or receivable agreements. We anticipating of federal tax law changes on that. So the county executive already directed all departments, county's own departments to submit 2% savings reduction. We have largely finished review all those with individual departments, and very soon we're going to have a final plan executed. And we already made sure, talking with everybody, that we're not going to have layoffs, we're not going to change any collective bargaining agreements, but we are going to do conditional hiring freeze with exceptions, sworn officers and really critical positions, etc. And we are looking at every individual line item to see whether there's any place people can absorb a little bit, temporary hold the positions, or find out some operating expenditure savings that's not going to impact services on that. So we are pretty much towards the end of finishing an exercise, and we're going to execute a plan there. And in general, as you all know, that the policy or the practice here is we always stay within means. So when the revenue number changes, we cut back our expenditure because we don't want to create a structural problem end of the year with that.
Holly,
Yeah.
sorry, on that first paragraph you mentioned resulting from suspected tax planning.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that for just a minute? Is that just incorrect projections or?
It's, what happens is the drop is largely associated with reconciliation of tax year 2016 tax revenues on that there. So in other words, the reconciliation typically at that point, based on the original state estimated how much each county should get there, at that time, and based on late filing, everything else there, we should have significant amount of amount due left to be distributed that's for prior year attributable to prior tax year. This year, we have a very small amount for generally wealthy, relatively wealthy counties there, and that's primarily associated with the higher income group there. So in general, it's believed because people anticipate that the tax law is going to be changed at federal level, and in particular benefit investors there, capital gains and those kind of level of income. So people intentionally delay the timing of realizing those gains. So what otherwise could have been happened in tax year 2016, which will reflect FY18 revenue, appears to be kicked down the road. That's the major reason.
Thank you.
How long will it take for you to really know what that is? Will that be another year before you really know what?
I think it's, yeah, it's sticky. And the issue is actually,
That's difficult.
yeah, the issue is actually the tax law didn't even take effect as fast as some people were speculations. So it's actually, it's kicked to tax year 2018, not even tax year 2017. The law is in effect. So some folks probably delayed even further now by another year to fully capture the benefit from federal tax law change. So in other words, it's pushed back one more year before you see something started to bounce back.
I'm sure you're gonna talk about it, you gotta be in a quandary as to, you get a future year, you have no idea what our state tax and local tax.
Right, and then you're absolutely right, and there's a lot of other caveat at that point, is federal tax policy, state tax law change, and even the market at that point could be very different. That year very good.
Do you have a sense of what the state is, what they're looking at relative to potential changes due to the federal, and what that might impact us?
I'll talk a little bit the next couple slides on that. It's very early at this point. My guess is they will do something, but they may not take away every penny in terms of potential increase on the state or local tax.
Right, they actually see a rise in tax.
Yeah. So that's actually a good lead to the next two slides. Again, this is primarily through communication with the state controller's office. They have been the primary, they have been working very diligent to try to calculate the potential impact. Understand there's a lot of complexity associated with consumer behaviors and potential law changes on that there. So based on their preliminary study, in terms of federal income tax, Marylanders are likely to benefit in general. The blue color, it's about 71% of the population will likely see a benefit or cuts in federal taxes. The rest of them, either the red color is actually the opposite. They're going to see an increase in federal tax, and the other 16% actually will see no change at all. The primary reason is there's a lot of the changes in terms of the standardization that's actually probably to have a benefit for a lot of families. The increase of child support credit and there's a lot of other items there, combined with tax rate decrease for the process bracket there. So that's why in general, the federal tax law change to a federal tax is relatively positive from taxpayers' viewpoint. It's not true for state and local tax, actually. It's very interesting, but if you look at here, the gray color, it's 68%, more than 2/3 of folks here are not going to be impacted at all for state and local tax. The reason is most of those benefits or tax credits at federal level is not automatically carried over to your state tax. And actually, some folks there, about 28%, in fact, is going to see an increase of your state and local taxes, and a small percentage of folks have actually small reduction in state tax. The reason is that, as I mentioned earlier, some of the benefit on the state tax, those tax cuts or credit, you're not going to automatically carry over to the state level. So actually, the taxable base for some of the folks actually is going to increase rather than decrease. There are a lot of uncertainties, as we mentioned. First is the consumer behavior. So the state did a really very diligent exercise, try to simulate, use computer simulation to come up with the data you see earlier, but that's based on a lot of assumptions. For example, how many folks there will try to do your best to maximize your benefit on federal tax, try to minimize your federal tax, but if you do that sometime, for example, if you go to standard deductions there, you may actually see your state and local tax actually increase there, because if you previously do itemized deduction, you actually probably enjoy more tax benefit on state and local tax. So some folks maybe try to maximize state, but then end up paying more state and local. And some folks may do more exercise, try to benefit your overall, you maximize your overall taxes there with all those combined, which could cause a change of how you categorize, how you report. So they did their best to make certain assumptions by how many percentage of the population do this way, how many percentage of people do the other way, and come with a number. So the number could still swing one way or another, although that's kind of the best it gets at this point. The timing, that's another thing. The tax laws impact this tax year, starting from this tax year, but through communication with them, is not likely to see anything until 2019, because really through spring next year, when people do tax filing for this tax year, we'll have a better sense about how much, and we actually will likely to materialize those potential things there. The biggest uncertainty is about state general assembly. They can make all kinds of changes. I'm sure you already heard about different legislation being filed or being considered by folks on that. And all those items could change how much you could gain from versus what you theoretically could gain. because any of those changes there would impact the true potential increase of state and local tax, because if people want, they actually make it neutral, meaning like, none of taxpayers pay more state tax there. So it all depends what's going to happen in the next few months.
Being an election year, I think that they will do something.
And you will see later that we factor in a portion of the potential gain for the county tax, but we're not assuming 100% at this point. This is county's general fund history there. Historically, it's on average 3-point-some% growth there. For 18 and 19, as you can see, slightly below the trend line. As we just talked about, 18 will be lower, and 19 will come back a little bit compared to FY 18 budget level. We're likely to see a very modest growth, which I'll give the numbers in a minute. As usual, the county is very heavily relied on property tax, income tax, which is 90% of the total. It's one thing I don't recall whether we share with this year. I think in the past we did. It's about general tax burden. If you just look at the two biggest tax, income tax and property tax, actually the county is among the highest in terms of tax rate. We're number 3 in terms of property tax, including fire property tax. And income tax, we are among the 6 counties that levy the highest level of local income tax rate allowed by the state. It is true, actually, we don't charge some other miscellaneous tax as other counties did, like some counties have energy tax, telecommunication tax. We don't do that here. But in terms of the two biggest tax, we actually are on the higher end. Here, our office did a calculation also to look at median house value as well as the median household income to know for typical or average household how much do you pay. And as you can see that for both items, the actual tax payment per household in the county, for those two taxes, actually, we are unfortunately the highest. Probably because we're more wealthier, but we are paying more. Even compared to Montgomery County, if you look at property tax, income tax, we are about 1,000 higher than the typical family in Montgomery County combined. Keep that in mind about we do actually tax our folks pretty.
It's part of it, I mean, Montgomery County has so many more people. So it's part of it just size, when you look at it on a per capita basis.
That's a good point, the population.
The 119 doesn't include the fire tax.
This includes the fire.
It does.
Yes. As you know, the county has 3 areas that each area get reassessed every 3 years, and the reassessment compared to 3 years ago get phased in the next 3 years there. We already showed this paragraph a couple of weeks ago, that you say historically the county had enjoyed certain period of very strong growth with the development, with the county's population growth, etc. Now we go to a moderate growth time period, and currently somewhere between 2 and 3% in general. And the latest data from state was showing FY19 property tax base growth is about 2.4%. Reassessment growth in the last 3 years actually showing trending down in terms of the growth rate. And the next couple slides compared us with the rest of the big counties there. So you can see that the one highlight is Howard County. A couple of points. One is that you see the reassessment growth. By the way, this is full value before you face in 3 years. So each year is really 1/3 of it. So the county's reassessment, it has been smaller and smaller. It's still positive, which is good, but it has been trending down in the level growth 3 years in a row now. The other thing is, if you compare the county with state average, we continue to be below the state average, and similar as a couple of years ago. And actually, compared to all those other counties, only one fall behind us is Howard. We actually have almost everybody else is doing slightly better than us. In terms of residential versus commercial, it's even more so on the residential side. Look, it's only 2.7%. So that's very, very moderate growth. I think it has been been happening, and I hope that's going to change in the next couple of years, is at least until now, the county has seen very slight increase of price here, hopefully in the next couple of years, it will change slightly. So residential part, unfortunately, that's the majority of the whole county's property tax base there. We have seen very minor moderate growth on that. Commercial base has been doing very good. Year after year, we see double-digit growth for like 5-6 years in a row now, and continue to be very strong and continue to beat the state average. So that's another point we made repeatedly, that the county, in order to boost the future tax base here, I think we need to maintain a policy of encourage commercial base.
I think interesting just to look at the height of the Great Recession, where you saw the home prices was plummeting. It's a more moderation on the commercial because it's revenue based. And so you get less of you certainly got a kick down, but a lot less than you did relative to residential.
Yeah. So the income tax, it's very volatile change from year to year, but in general, if you can see the last couple years here, last 4 years there, with the exception of 2016, which stayed over distributed as we're still paying back there. On average, we are less than 3%, which is a little bit alarming. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 years, these 3 years that we are hovering around 0% on that. I don't think that reflects the true situation because the timing and the consumer behavior change as well as the state distribution calculation there. But you can see that even the average there, we are not very strong. It's about 3%, which is not great. Historically, it was higher on that. And 2019, you see a bump here because we already factored in about $4 million from the potential benefit from the impact of federal tax law change on that. That's about a half of what otherwise could realize because we want to use some conservative understanding potential change in general.
I want to throw out something for Jeff back to there, and just to think about it just struck me. We have an ever-increasing rate of growth in our over 65. Do we have any understanding of those over 65 who do leave the county relative to stay, what the income distribution is there in terms of annual income?
No, I'm not aware of that information. I do know that it's always the question, are people going to age in place? And the state had done a study statewide, and generally, most people do decide to age in place. So it's not like there's a huge exodus of people. There are a percentage of people that do move to Florida or Arizona or something like that. But the vast majority of people do age in place. But of those that leave, I don't know what their income is.
I was just thinking, and I'm probably wrong,
Yes.
is if the ones that leave, other than one another, are leaving for tax advantage because they now have fixed income and they want to optimize their revenue, so we'd be losing, if that, maybe a stupid assumption, we'd be losing our higher revenue versus
Right.
the others.
But Steve, if they stay, they generally have a reduced revenue.
Either way,
They're not
they have
increasing.
a reduced
So
revenue.
in some ways it balances or not.
Yes, and that's a good point. And that's actually in terms of long-term impact of aging population.
Is impacting our revenue.
And by the way, the county does provide aging in place tax credit for folks at 65 plus and stay in the same house for 40 years or we already talked about that earlier, so I'm not going to talk too much about personal income, capital gains, the state distribution formula, about the impact of income tax. So in case there, we cannot get away from it, can we? That's, it's the annual impact is already built into the base, because that's already kicking like years ago on that. The historical liabilities there, the state already did a payment for the counties, and we're supposed to pay them back through installments starting from the end of FY 2019. So once it's annualized, about $2 million a year. At the end of FY 19, it's about $500,000 there. So it's going to expand it like 5 years. However, there's some new laws being considered, so that could be delayed even further, so we'll see. Okay, here we do see it as a piece of positive news. This is a slide I got from, we got it from the report, preliminary report from Dr. Clinch, who is still working, fine-tuning on that. But this one was compared the personal income growth of the county versus state and national average. In 2013, as you can see that, at that point, we were not doing good. By the way, the gray color is the county. The county. So 2013, as you reported, the tax cliff and federal, we were actually hit pretty bad. And 2014, we recovered as everybody else, but we still trend not as good as state or national. 2015, we started to get a little better. We still a little better than everybody else there. 2016, we finally doing a little better than our peers at that point. But the number is not necessarily getting better, it's just kind of stabilized. They're behind us. So one thing is that in terms of absolute percentage, this one actually is hovering around 4%, which is actually a much better number in our opinion compared to less than 0% a few years ago. So looking forward, that actually Dr. Clinch is relatively positive that we probably can maintain 3.9 to 4.1, so in general around 4% on that, understanding that we still have reasonably good job growth and the salary finally start to show signs of picking up. So that's a general positiveness. Again, it's not historically crazy growth, strong growth there, but 4% is very good in our opinion if that can be state aid update there based on government's proposal. Actually, the statewide state aid increase, I think it's about 2.4%. And based on the formula, the state aid to Howard County actually increased over 4%, primarily consists of those aid to our educational entities. So that's a good. Multi-year revenue projections. Okay, so 2019, to summarize, based on the information we discussed earlier, primarily property tax, income tax, most other taxes are relatively minor change, a couple percentage, and they, in aggregate, make a very minor difference in terms of the bottom line. So FY19, we're looking at this point close to around $24 million, which is about 2.2% higher than the prior budget. And it is still pending a lot of assumptions there, depending on General Assembly final decision, because we currently already factored about half of it.
Going back to the previous slide, whenever there's an increase in state aid to education, is there an expectation there of a comparable increase at the local level?
No, it's not tied.
So that increase could be in lieu of an increase at the local level?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, what happens is when the state aid provided, they provide to the education entities directly. So historically, okay, let's use the school system as an example. There, historically, when the school system made early projections about how much they get from the state and how much they get from the county for the bottom line, if the state aid end up being higher, historically sometimes we will work with them to lower the request from the local side. And this year we are working with them, understanding they have a pretty significant issues in their health benefit fund. There's a policy change. We could work with them to lower the request on the local side, or they use that funding to address their health benefit fund deficit. But historically speaking, what you described, Milton, has been happening in the past on that is the offset.
How much of the state is, of that number is actually maintenance effort versus?
State aid is not.
Not
Maintenance
maintenance.
effort is always big.
So their money is all, is it new money because they're required, you know, if that's 200 million, whatever, I think it was the number.
It's an enrollment formula, period. Every county gets the same amount
So it's an
based
enrollment
on.
formula, so, okay, so it's not maintenance, in a sense, it's a backside maintenance effort.
Basically, yes.
Yes.
Because
Yes,
that's what-
basically, yes, yes.
Unless you
Yes,
lose
it is.
population.
But my point is, that we understand relative to school, it's not new money, okay? It's not new money, it's basically the number of students, so it's basically paying for that
Yes.
piece.
State aid and the county was based on different things. They are not tied together, so number one. And both state and the county are driven by formula, state based on the wealth per pupil, and also the enrollment growth, etc. The county's piece is the maintenance efforts most based on last year's county appropriation plus the student enrollment.
It's a per pupil maintenance of effort, again. But again, everything's delayed by a year.
Yeah.
So
based
it's
on
not
existing rather
funding
than
for the
projected.
projected students who will be here. It's
You're
based
always-
on the
you're
students
always
that were
a year
officially at the end of October, around October of the prior year.
But because we've had such dramatic
Right.
increase,
And it's
student
still-
population will get more money.
Yeah, but other counties are getting less as they see decreases, but then they petition to get adjustments for that because otherwise they can't maintain the level of services for the students they have. So that puts a crunch on how allocations are. And then there's a Wellesley County penalty, and then there's a GCEI for the geographic cost of living supplement, which kind of end up balancing each other out.
Simple formula.
It's a simple. But also I will remind that there are categories of students who are not included in the base formula. So there's a base formula for every student, then there's for special education, for ESOL, and for poverty, and those are the same across the state. However, mandatory pre-K students are not covered in that per pupil allocation. So those services that must be provided, which are sometimes pretty intensive because the children who qualify are in poverty, that can become an issue, and that's been mandated for a while.
And the state and the county does not include that in their calculations as well.
It's also not included in enrollment.
No.
I call them the ghost children. They have seats, they have teachers, they have parking spaces, all of that, but in the capacity for schools, it's not included, and in the enrollment figures for the county on which these numbers are based, they're not included.
So your future projections, which are somewhat robust compared to the 3.1 to 3.6?
Right. So the future, primarily assuming property tax is going to maintain a little more than 3% base per year, and income tax going back to what was Dr. Clinch was anticipating, probably around 4% after 1 year also. Will we cover on that?
On the property, I'm just trying to get my hands around the growth in the county. So the property tax, as you look historically at all the property tax numbers, it takes into account a certain amount of new assets, whether it's commercial or property. So as that pulls down, in any way have you taken into account the slowdown in development and what that will do, as well as as we talked about in past years, the change on the commercial side and the residential and the asset class sides, which is a different valuation.
This one has not factored in any potential local or state law changes that's going to impact the development pattern. So that has not. So in other words, if development slow down Saddle, that's going to have some impact on both revenue and expenditure side. That hasn't been accounted.
But I'm saying there's two pieces of that. One is the legislation just passed, but the other is that we already knew that there was a change in the demographics relative to what type of assets are being built. More detached, more multifamily, less big houses in the West. Again, we still have some good commercial growth, but on the residential side, really different. And that impacts the personal income as well as growth,
Yes.
as well as the asset growth.
Yes, I think what Steve tried to say that is that based on the findings you see last year from the committee report, is that the housing portfolio has been shifting, not only here but also in the region. We start to see the growing component from multifamily rather than traditional dominant place, single family. And because of the profile of the tenants there or owners there, for those houses, they typically have less median income and also more service needs on that. So that's actually impact both the property tax value, because some property value is different, but also personal income there. That change, however, happened gradually. It's not year after year, and has already been reflected in the last couple of years. Why your property base increase slow down? I think one of you asked a question last time. That is not it's one of the factors there. The whole structure of the property is given time gradually changing on that. But primarily, I have to say the primary driver of the property is still the existing property, the revaluation. That's the majority. The new development it's adding a piece, but it's still relatively small. So the next several years, we are still looking at between 3.1 to 3.6 per year. It did drop a little bit from last year. Last year, I was originally looking at 3.7% for a couple of years. Now we actually not as optimistic, but I still believe in the long-term viewpoint, the county should at least have adequate growth rather than 2% or less than 2% as when we are experiencing
Well, it depends what we mean by adequate growth versus demand of expenses.
Yes, yes. And that is the, yeah. And when you compare it to expenditures, like absolutely right, that's. Expenditure structure, again, as we all know that the biggest part is education, followed by public safety, public facility, and others on that there. And education, the blue color represents direct appropriation. That doesn't include the debt service piece that's related to our education facilities, and it also doesn't include the debt service, the retired health benefit contribution.
But that is inclusive of the library and HCC.
Yes.
So if
Yes.
we add
It's
the
not
other,
just school, it's the community college and library.
so if we add the other pieces, you said it would be about, if I recall, 65%.
65%, so it's about 2/3. If we did everything, that's funding related. And also, we just get the state's latest data about per pupil county spending, and that the county remained number 3 among all counties there, just after Rochester and the Montgomery County, which is the status the same, ranking the same as last year. And in terms of the total county dollar per student spend, it's $10,321 per pupil, which is about 41% higher than the state average.
Do you know what Montgomery County is, what that number is?
I'll pull that number. I think it's close to ours,
It's
not
very,
that much.
it's very close.
That's what I figured.
And they increased taxes by 9% last year.
Yes. Okay, 2019. Okay. Obviously, because 19 is not a typical year, we have a more than usual. This year, revenue growth is close to $20 billion. Expenditure, here's the request we have so far. You can see the three education entities combined, the requested growth is already 26 million, which is higher than our overall revenue growth. And then we have debt service payment. By the way, debt service payment this year, the growth is more than usual because last year we joined a one-time refinancing benefit about 9.7 million, so that's, you see a big bump that year. And OPEB incremental, that's a retired health benefit to address long-term liability, 3 million increase, and the rest of the county is about 13 million increase there. So everything combined, we have a gap, estimated gap of 35.3 million before you take actions. So good luck for me. So we'll deal with that next 2
Well, the
months.
county OPEB, does that include the school system?
Yes, actually 2/3 of that.
So here's what I want to understand just on that. In past reports, we talked about that there was an actual review that we were funding a little bit beyond what, you know, it was going to pay off by 2021, 2022, if I recall.
More, I think a little later than that.
But was that before understanding what the issue was at the school?
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to know, since the school was part of that,
Yeah.
what are, if, that's a separate issue, but what does it look like from what we've been saying that we paid down? And now if you put in that structural deficit, and we had all the money to pay out, you know, we were doing the same payment, how long would that be out?
Okay, I don't know whether I answered the question accurately, but what's happening is this one is, this payment, so by the way, if we include that 3 million increase, meaning that we're assuming 19 million payment in FY 2019.
That's the total of 19.
Yeah, 19,
For
so,
you.
because we are increasing 3 million a year. This amount is not to address our annual payment for that year's cost for retired health benefit. Rather, this is try to gradually address long-term liability, because with all those existing teachers, existing county employees, et cetera, we have to long-term liability about what eventually will be needed. So based on the best practice there, to avoid the situation after 10 years, we someone face a huge cost at that point here. We should do more than what's only the cost for that year, but address long-term liability, taking incremental funding on that. So what we have been doing is starting from a few years ago, and we have basically a 10-year plan on that. So try to stick to that, and then by, I think, fiscal 2025, 2026, in that time frame there, we're supposed to kind of gradually build to the full liability. So at that point, we only have to deal with annual costs. We don't have to worry about additional costs there. And that's a practice to help avoid long-term liability down the road become unmanageable.
So my question is, knowing what we know now, relative to the light being shined on the issue, is what, where are we relative to that? Because it seems like that, what you told me doesn't mean anything, because it doesn't have all the information in it, relative to unfunded liability. I mean, if the school system has a structural deficit and unfunded liability, and that's part of that number.
No,
No,
that's
no.
that's not this at all.
Okay, that's,
The school system issue is the daily payment. They don't even have funding to do that because of structuring balance, which I will have one slide to talk about that, and the rest of you will help me and other folks around the school system. This is not, this is talk about long-term needs on that. And we made a commitment to take care of not only ourselves, but also other folks
we're good there.
for the long term. The current piece on that is supposed to be taken care of in the annual budget in the school system, and we will see where it actually happens.
that was your annual just payments, okay.
Okay, so this is obviously very challenging. What if we are in a typical year? If we are in a typical year, then revenue is a much better number, $35 million here. And on debt service side, there is typically 7 to 8 million increase rather than significant growth on that. Even that, the problem is that we continue to look at 14 to 15%. So that's a fundamental issue I want to let folks know that is the revenue growth is even, we have a solid growth, that's not sufficient to support fundamental requests here or fundamental changes here. I don't believe those expenditure requests are outrageous. These people believe that's needed to support your daily operations here, to cope with the needs of the community here. But even that, a typical year revenue are not enough to support that level of growth here. So that's a continuous struggling. Multi-year projections here. If we extend that to the beyond the 1-year window, and if we don't take any corrective actions here, then obviously that gap is going to continue and grow every year. And eventually the gap between the blue, which is the expenditure needs, and the revenue part will grow to as high as $100 million by 2024 if we don't do anything. And if we assume that continues, then the ending fund balance of the general fund will likely become negative, actually significant negative number in the next few years. We're not going to let that happen, because what's happening is every year we're going to have balance the budget, we'll make it worse. What they try to tell you is that actually there is a continuing difficulty year after year if we try to make the
Are you telling us in a different way, if we don't change how we do business with all the structural deficits?
huge women better than that's what the message. And the major components here is similar as the chart we saw earlier that was on the top of the county's own agency, within the bottom is all of our direct information for our 3 education entities there, and in the middle, the debt service, retiree health benefit for everybody else on that. And one thing I want to point out is I want to thank our education entities because we actually, those long-term projections, again, it's preliminary data, don't quote us for that there, but we have been working with the schools, the community college, and our library system, and these reflect everybody's input in that, on that. And one thing I want to let folks know is when we talk about long-term projection, is less important to be accurate because you cannot, because there's so much unknowns, but it's very important still to do it because it gives you understanding about the general trend and the scope and identify issues. Another thing we want to bring to our attention is the components of those different factors. A look at the middle of that. What worries me is that in the middle, which is really the efforts to address long-term liability, those are the debt service payment, the retiree health benefit, the incremental contribution, and then after a couple of years, we go to new items for past 30-year contract. That component actually is going to grow as a percentage of total. Kind of as what Steve alluded earlier on that, the debt service as a percentage of revenue itself may not be a big concern in terms of level from rating agency's viewpoint, but nevertheless, it's going to eat into what could be available for the rest of the offering budget. So, holding everything else the same, that component will grow gradually. But then what's going to happen is what's left for actually for education entity and for the rest of the county government, direct appropriation is actually going to both shrink slightly from where we are currently as a percentage of total. So everybody's going to grow, but in terms of who grows the first or faster is actually going to be this group that's going to be growing faster. So that's another thing that's basically saying we have gradually less room for the rest of the county.
But OPEB, does it eventually go away? Is that in
Yes,
2026?
after this period, actually, that's going to, it's not go away, it's just stabilize.
In theory.
It goes forever? You never get rid of OPEB?
In theory, Bruce, in
They're not
theory.
going to revisit it? Of course they won't.
At that point, it's going to stabilize in
Stabilize.
general.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to. So yes, if you do another 10 years, then that's going to be.
Hey, Holly, what about pension contributions?
Pension is included in the all agencies there for county employees, and in the schools is including this. So some of the fundamental long-term issues, I mean, I think you're already aware of all of them anyway, just try to summarize. The driver is, one is the cost to deliver same level of service each year is going to continue to grow. Salary, there's the pensions, there's the health benefit, retail health benefit. So that's the cost for delivering the same level of service is going to grow continuously. And then it's not enough to develop the same level of services there. The county's population has been growing on average of 1.6%. We got to from Jeff from ED on that. So that's basically demand increase of all kinds of services, public safety, snow removal, parks, recreation service. And we know already the student enrollment growth has been hovering around 1.8 to 2% on that. But on top of that, everything else also needs the community demand more service. And actually, in particular, the senior population is going to increase significantly, basically doubling, expected to double in 2 decades here. So as represented by this orange color, on the very top, it's expected to see how fast it's growing. Expected actually to be slightly over student population by 2030, and that is a group of folks here we are expecting to have smaller revenues, comparatively speaking, but they're going to have a lot of needs on that, and we want people to age in place here. So that's going to be a lot of demand on the service side, but on the revenue side, actually, we expect some less revenues on that. That service we mentioned earlier and some other long-term liabilities we continue to to address those to avoid things getting worse in the future. On the revenue side, the capacity limit by new development capacity, not only legislation but also open space available, the aging population, house shift, we all mentioned this earlier. And the other thing I feel to point it out early is that, in counties, local governments in general, but in particular in our county, both our education entities and the county government, we are receiving less and less a portion from federal or state in terms of the aid or grants on that, and more rely on our own resources there. And throughout the years, because federal state government, they have their own structural problem, they try to kind of reduce what they can, or so in general, we anticipate flat or very minor growth from those resources. But the needs are there, so what's happening is more and more demand on local funding, and that actually kind of put more pressure to the government and for our taxpayers, and that's more likely to continue. Another piece of known spending pressure in the next several years here is what we just mentioned earlier, is the school system health benefit fund, and I will go over this quickly, and feel free to join me about focusing in the school board and our school system there. So, as you probably heard from the news, the school system recently reported existing deficit of about $22 million at the end of 2017 in their health benefit fund. And more importantly, there's also a structural imbalance of about $28 million estimate between the revenue they allocate to the fund and the actual expenditure in that fund. So everything combined, current estimate, my understanding is close to $50 million negative fund balance by end of FY18.
Question, just a couple, one, that was 2009, fiscal year 2009, the first year that happened.
No.
So that's the next bullet.
Okay.
Yeah, if you allow me. So what we have been talking with the system, because the issue I think surfaced about a year ago, but at that point we're not too certain what happened. We have been talking with the school system, I think with their kind of communication and collaboration, I think we now have a better understanding. What has been happened, looks like, is that in 8 out of the past 10 years, the school system has been allocating less funding to this fund than the actual cost in that fund. So these bars represent each year how much money was allocated to that fund versus how much was actually spent out of the fund. So you can see that out of this year, with exception of fiscal 2011 and 2014, which basically balanced there, every other year, that fund has been drawn down fund balance, which is one-time resources to support ongoing expenditure year after year. So what was the consequence of doing that repeatedly? Is that it's basically I use your savings account if I support your daily operations. So one day, so number one, that's going to gradually draw down your fund balance, and that's why at the peak, the fund balance was $21.6 million in 2011. Now it's estimated to be negative 50 million. So every year it has been going up. Secondly, you start to gradually build up a structural imbalance, because every year the actual funding goes there is continuing to be lower and lower than the actual expenditure. So one day, we not only exhaust the fund balance, but also what's allocated that fund versus the actual expenditure already created a huge gap. At this point, it's so sizable. It's going to big pain on the school system, but also it's going to be a significant issue that kind of has to get addressed.
What's the total school budget, school system budget?
$850 million, that's what we're projecting. 850.
850 million.
Hey, Holly, just real quickly, I'm gonna look to my.
No, just operating, yeah.
Look to my two friends across the table here. Do we, Holly references ongoing expenditures. Do we have an idea of what those were historically? Like, how did we get here?
Well, we've been
Sorry for putting you on the spot, guys.
I think
I see that term, I'm like, okay.
we've had this conversation. I think the board actually had all these questions on Tuesday. Because what we did was I presented how we got here to the board, so they have a full flavor of what our opinion is of how we got here. There are a number of factors. One was, I think these guys have already mentioned some of the mandatory requirements like pre-K. So that has a huge impact. It wasn't funded by the state, neither was it funded by the county. But we are doing it. So that's costing money. When it started, it was about $7.3 million back in 2013. Now, I think last 2 weeks ago when I presented, I said pre-K is going to be costing us about $17.5 million. That's not funded by anyone. So we are eating that cost. And two, we could have had salary increases over the years. So those two alone put that huge strain. And so what I see from doing my analysis is that the fund that gave up, the not fully getting funding, was the health benefits fund in order to meet the pressure and obligations from all the other issues that we have in the school system. So it is really, and of course, there is healthcare growth.
And the pension.
Yes, the pension was shifted from the state to the county. So there are a number of factors.
And I don't know if this would be helpful or not, Steve, but maybe this presentation that you made, if you could provide it to put in the Dropbox as supplemental information to the report that you did 2 weeks ago, just so we have that information as well.
Okay.
Unless it's a...
Right, when that was going on, and we'll leave it because it's done was done.
Sure.
But when that was going on, the county, well, we have got 2 county executives in those years. Okay, what was disclosed to the county, and what was decided from your perspective? You weren't there. But as you can see, what was disclosed to the county, and what was disclosed to the board?
I don't know what was disclosed to the board. I don't know. I know a couple of years ago, when the county funded the salary increases, what happened was they did not fund these costs of healthcare. The decision was made that the school system have entered into an agreement with these bargaining units to increase salaries. So the county funded that. But there was another cost that was in the budget, but the county could not fund it. So that increased the deficit in this fund as well. Of course, once you fund salaries, it doesn't go away. It's not one time. It's recurring. So these pressures have all been, they've come to a head. So I think that, like Dr. Son mentioned, this has been going on back to, I would say, the report presentation, I think it was back to 2007. But if you go back, it's even way further back than that. So we know it was going to happen. It was how soon was it going to happen?
But this has been a
structural problem.
Financial management practice of the system for at least 10 years, perhaps even longer.
Sounds like a gas tank.
Well, no, the concern is, it's not actually, but the concern is, and it's, again, this is not a rough view, but you have 60, if you just look at the school system, including health, we have 62% of our budget. 62% of our budget, and you don't have the transparency that you have in the other 35% of the budget. It's not the board, looking now, it's not the board's fault, but something inherently is wrong with that picture.
Just for the naive ones in the room, explain how the health benefit fund works. I mean, most of us think of the health benefits as we go buy insurance and, you know, the cost is going through the roof, and is that essentially, I mean, how is it?
Theirs is probably self-insured.
So it's all self-insured?
Yeah, we are self-insured.
Yeah.
So is there a component of this that's just the explosion of health costs and?
There's that component as well. Healthcare costs have been growing by about 7% year over year. So we're growing. We are not fully even meeting funding what is required. So and it keeps growing. So as you can see, there were only 2 times that funding actually happened. So
the $50 million is to cover the current completed fund balance and to place, I'm assuming, to create another fund balance. Is there a board mandated level of balance that should be in that account? Is there a level based on the self-insurance agreement that we have?
no, not that I know of. But the industry standard does dictate that you should have at least 3 to 4 months worth of expenses
How
in your
much?
fund balance. 3 to 4 months.
3 or 4 months?
And
Okay, so 3 to 4 months of that, and what's the run rate, and what's the monthly expenses on that?
approximately $11, $12 million.
Monthly?
Yes.
It's more than 8,000 people.
Yeah.
There's probably, Steve, you probably would have
The largest business in the county.
an actuary, either actuaries or a firm come in and give them an idea.
I'm trying to understand where the 50 is coming from, and now I understand.
It's the imbalance of that. Yes?
Just a quick question, I mean, healthcare oftentimes is one of your most expensive employee benefits. Obviously, that depends on the type of retirement plans you have, whether it's defined contribution, defined benefit, but oftentimes the most expensive component within within employee benefit. What kind of benchmarking have we done to see on a, per covered member comparison is the experience within the county compared to other counties, other organizations?
In terms of the healthcare benefits, I think we are within with the other 23 counties and cities.
So we've done the benchmarking on that. We've actually been able to see that we're pretty comparable, or that we're...
Yes.
Is that a?
Yes,
Yeah,
White House
interesting.
is slightly better, but yes, the difference is not huge. And we are currently looking at every option to see how we align with that average, because we know we are slightly better.
And do we ever compare to...
Yes, which is the biggest component. All of this is negotiated.
Is it that's what I mean, it's a contract issue as to the health benefit?
Yes.
Yeah, so
The share is negotiated, though, right? The share
between
between the employer and the employee, but in terms of benefit utilization and things of that nature, I mean, there is opportunities to drive costs down depending upon where you're...
Yes, but I think the way most of our contracts, bargaining unit contracts are written, everything has to be negotiated for you to change any plan.
So why don't you negotiate it?
It's a mutual,
It's a
yes,
mutual
we're
agreement.
negotiating,
I know.
it's a mutual, and
I
then
know,
it
but
goes
you
to
just
a
did a
labor.
negotiation.
Yes, but it
We
goes
still
to a
don't know.
labor board that
Right. Yes, sir.
determines what happens, and that is not dependent on what can be paid. Unless there is provision that if there is not adequate funding from the county, which did not happen when the raises were funded, but not this, that you can renegotiate.
But the issue here, I mean,
didn't
the
happen.
situation that the school system is facing is not a benefits facing level of benefits or the all-fair benchmarking. I'm sure that's done. The issue is financing. It's what the benefits are, it's how.
Well, no, I mean, part of, speaking as one board member, the issue is basically this. The school system was spending money that we didn't have. The health and dental fund was where we were robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean,
No, that's what I mean by financing. It wasn't finance.
So, I mean, so when we talk about the health and dental fund, that is just where they were not funding, they were unfunding, they were not putting, correct me if I'm wrong, they were not putting the amount of funding
That
on
is
the school
required.
system's part that was required in order to finance that, because the money was instead going for programs and other things.
I agree with you.
But that's to keep the fund.
It's 85.
We weren't ignoring paying for health costs, we were just not putting additional funds into reserve.
No.
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 We're not
We're
fully.
funded.
They weren't fully, they weren't fully
Lower than that.
To explain the 2 years that Dr. Son just mentioned that we put in more money, it wasn't because we budgeted to fund it at that level, we budgeted to fund it at a lower level. But at the end of the year, there was what we call transfer, because we had surpluses on other areas because of decisions that were made not to do this, not to do that. Those money were now transferred those 2 years. That's why you see this spike that they are over. Because it's not like the budget, from a budgeted standpoint, which is what you should do when you have a fixed cost, is to fully budget your cost.
So you basically had an end of the year surplus, you moved it into that.
Yes.
So let me just take those back, just a trip down memory lane. If you want to see something that was, in my view, not nice. When we came in 2000, the first year I had this thing was 2014, 15, fiscal year, whatever. We found out that the year before, the county executive had put $40-some million, or a huge amount to the school system because we had a surplus. And we did a lot of discussion how we shouldn't be doing that. We should be saving some of it because the next year he left us with, he didn't leave us on purpose, but we had a big deficit of $16 million and $20 million in the budget. Knowing what we know now and what he may or may not have known, that if you were going to give that money to fix it, that's where that money should have gone. With a caveat that it'll never happen again relative to the deficit. The money just went, and I'm sure it went for salary and other things, but that $40 million that went to the school system that year from.
Steve, I understand what you're saying, but any money we give to the school system gets, if I'm not mistaken from the years, any money we give to the school system gets included in the distributions to the school system. You can't say, oh, well, this bucket goes over here.
You can get the state.
No, I'm saying that, I agree, but that was a separate piece that went as pay-go, as part of that. And I'm just saying, if you were, Steve, if you or I were negotiating and said to, I think, I don't know if it was Renee or Cindy at the time, you and I were saying, I got this much extra money and we knew about that problem, you could have a discussion on whether you get the money or not relative to how you use that money because you had this problem that's coming back on the rest of the county.
Well, no. Let me try it. So here's what happens. We were talking about the MOE money, which is called maintenance of effort, which the state says, the state law is that school systems, if you spend $10,000 on students in fiscal year A, in fiscal year B, you must spend that amount. You can spend more, but you have, you're obligated to the 10,000,
Right.
let's say. What happens is when you give more money to the school system, and it goes in not as one-time money, it will count to that base. So what it does, pardon my French, is it creates this anomaly that we were spending more money, but we were spending more money because it was put in that account. Had that money come to the school system as one-time money, it would not have counted about against maintenance of effort. So when you do that, it artificially raises your maintenance of effort.
It's like salary, instead of salary instead of stipend.
That's correct.
It's like salary instead of stipend. You're building a continued growth in that
Correct.
you can't run.
That's correct. And that's exactly what happened in FY 15. This is, I think, Steve, that's the year what you mentioned, this year. What happened in that year, that's before me, but my understanding in that year, the county provides the school system more than 20 million above the maintenance efforts. And that's in the base, not for future impact, future years, not one time. And that's also election year, right? Okay. Yeah. But with that level of growth, this fund not only get depleted, because that year actually the fund balance almost dropped to zero, but also in that year, the funding flow to this health benefit fund was like 11 million lower than the annual cost of that fund. So with that level of growth there, this fund actually have a bigger structural imbalance, and the fund almost already in.
And another anomaly, and Ref, you correct me if I'm wrong, I believe where we see the green spike was the ARRR, the Reinvestment Act. There was like $22 million that the school system got. And what happened is they ended up putting that in the health and dental fund.
Yes,
Yes.
Which is a whole other discussion.
but that's because it was one-time grant money.
Right.
Is there any other county-related agency that could have this kind of a challenge? I mean, one of the things that we see as citizens is governments are terrible at pensions and health benefits. They give very good health benefits and they give very good pensions. And the financial people don't estimate that very well. That's OPEB, that's this. So is there other places in the county that have that kind of potential?
Okay. What we talk about in this school system, this is not.
I mean, this is school system only, does the county self-fund?
In the county side, I'll tell you, when I started, our own health benefit fund is not very healthy as well. It's, I think it's above zero, but it's heading towards not
So
good.
this is not just.
So at that point, we did a multi-year plan to avoid that from happening. Even at that point, the first year we come here, we had mid-year savings, mid-year cuts because revenue didn't get realized there. And the next year, as a result, it's a moderate growth. We worked together with county and said, we got to find those line here. We tighten in everything else there, but we cannot oversee this there. We got to put the money, we just have to make hard decisions there. We have to put the money here, and we have to put money in risk management, et cetera. So we actually avoided becoming active, and actually we started gradually these up a little bit on balance now. It's a policy thing there. You've got to have to make a hard choice there because these are competing needs. If you see this is something important, and you've got to address there, then you make one of the top priorities.
Just to quickly add, the school system is somewhat completely different.
Yes.
Because 85% of all our revenue are towards labor. And everything that has to do with labor has to be negotiated. So when you have that huge task,
I'm just
then
saying
you
this
have a
could
major
happen
problem.
in any of the government agencies.
But also you have to understand that the pension fund, which is mandated by the state and managed by the state, and to which the counties are obligated, is underfunded as well.
Yeah, we have to.
It's, and you have, and business, locals have no control over the rates or the return or the components of that pension. And yet you are obligated to pay, and so for the county, that was a hit of roughly $35 million a year with no corresponding revenue. So once that phased in, the complete transfer in, that creates an imbalance that increased revenues can't address.
Yes, great.
I was gonna say, honey, didn't you increase employees' contributions to help fund the plan? I seem to remember mine going up over the last year.
The first year I was,
You're the only one.
the first year I was here, actually, I had to increase the employer contribution per position by 15%. And I did that for a couple of years there, squeezing the rest of my own budget because I really important to fund the counties to rebalance their county own health benefits. You just have to do that choice. Again, I think the county may not be in exactly the same percentage, also 70-some percentage of us is personnel costs on that. But again, this is just, you have competing priority, you have to.
County self-funded as well.
Yes.
It would make,
So we just
it would
have
not
to
make
do
sense.
that.
I understand.
We need to move.
Okay. So in general, I mean, this is a significant issue. It's a historical issue. What also I want to make it clear on that. It's not, you know, not to really pick on the Ruffy and others on that. I know, like, we actually are doing very well together at this point. Like, we as a school system are working collaboratively to understand the issue and try to address it jointly. What I want to emphasize just in 1 minute is that, you know, it is true that it's already happened. It's an issue we all have to address there. But we believe the school system do have to take the ownership of the issue. The county has providing above maintenance efforts funding for years there. You can argue whether it's sufficient or not on that, but you have to live with that there. And also we have to come out with permanent solution rather than one time because it's a structural issue, not just to address the historical level. And have to develop a multi-year plan. I don't think it can be fixed in 1 year. And in partnership with us, we are willing to work with them on that there. And also have to come out with a mechanism to avoid this happening again because it's what happened here is unfortunately was really not clear to us until more recently. Okay. 1 minute about infrastructure needs that there. I don't want to talk too much. You already heard the speakers in the previous meetings from DPW director told you earlier that we have tremendous needs on the roads. Actually, the repair of the highway needs inventory is already reached $15 million there. You also heard the tremendous needs on education entities as well as public safety and detention center, courthouse, and a lot of news on that there, and the health and senior centers on that. All these actually demand a lot of investment, and one thing I want to say that some of these may not be as sexy, but it's really needed, like those roads, these basic infrastructure needs on that. Annual base, the GO 95 million, typically we are authorized each year and limited other funding sources. Again, just like operating budgets, really help us.
That's what he's spent or borrowed.
Yes.
but not what we recommended.
Right, actually happened. But what I try to say that the challenge is no less compared to operating budget in terms of the funding versus all the needs of the community. So,
I get it.
yeah, I understand. And some of the thoughts there is, number one, as a fiscal person, very important. We always have to live with the needs. We try to grow the needs, but we have to live with the needs. And another thing is the long-term vision here. I want to make sure that when the hours here and there, that when I'm here, that we should try to avoid, put too much burden to down the road, so to burn out the future capacity. So that's why we are working on controlling debt service increase. We are working to address those long-term liabilities because we don't want the future capacity exhausted on that. Innovation is very important. I think we are working hard currently on that, the use of technology, like one of the introduced P3s and other alternative ways of delivering the capital budget on that. We have to work with everybody on long-term planning, as we just talked about, and prioritization, because there's so much competing needs. A lot of dialogues really is not just single out why this is important, and how do this compare with everything else. And also the same, similarly, try to balance the needs of raising revenues, and also we try to keep the county competitive to continue to attract business, which is going to add to your tax base, as well as the talents, which are also going to grow your tax base. And accountability is important to the county in the next few months, and hopefully to roll out the performance measures on that, because we want to make ourselves accountable so that we invest in the place that can generate results. Sometimes the more investment not necessarily lead to better results, and sometimes you can improve results, not necessarily ask for more money. So all these we have to have. That's it.
Okay, we got a couple things to do. We typically start with our recommendations. And the two major recommendations that we have, our real charge from the county executive is borrowing and spending. And then I guess the third is actually projecting revenues in the out years. You're basically saying we have 1.9% is what the projected revenue. 2.2% for next year. And then we have the issue of borrowing.
And the impact of that borrowing on.
Well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. And then I want to sort of work through that, see if we actually record the vote on this. And then move to some things that a small group has discussed in terms of how we communicate. We're going to get to the other recommendations next week, and talk about some other issues that we discussed as a small group of us relative to how we articulate this to the community. So people always ask me, well, why aren't you spending this? And last year we talked, I remember at Leadership Howard County, and this gentleman said, I agree with your recommendations and some of the things you've talked about where we need to get our hands on expense, et cetera, et cetera. He said, what should we do? And I said, that's not our job. Our job in here is what we can spend. It is the job of the county council, the county executive, relative to where we spend that money and make those decisions. That's not ours. The second decision in terms of how much we borrow, and Ellen, I think what you were saying, what we've done, and I think it's why we can pay for the courthouse in a sense, is we took down borrowing 2 years before we came here, which was $120 million, which the reality gets spent downstream, okay? And we took that down to, I think, now $85 million last year. So we took it down to from 100 million to 95, 90, 85, the first 3 years. Okay? What we have outlined is we did 85 last year, and the county executive, I'm surprised, it was 90 or 92 million. So whatever we do, and I did this 20-some years ago, Ed was on that committee. We told Chuck Ecker he couldn't borrow anything. It was if you think we've had a bad, but that was horrible back then. We said we couldn't borrow anything. He borrowed $25 million, I look back at it. So our job is to give guidance. Their job is to make the tough decisions. They have to go out and find votes, not us. Okay? So what I'd like to do is talk about, first of all, funding. My general thought, if Holly's numbers are 2.2, I really want to entertain why it should be lower or higher.
But Holly, your number is 2.2 off of last year's budgeted amount, but
Correct.
it's higher off of what we're actually seeing
Yes.
from a revenue perspective.
Because we're 15 million in the hole.
But you're expecting us to still hit that 2.2 over last year's budget.
Yes, that's compared to last year's budget. Compared to estimate actually, it's better.
Yeah, it's like,
And the reality is, if we're off, if the budget's off, as the county executive's doing this year, he's got to find ways to balance that budget during the term. He did that his first term, he's doing it now his third year. And the first year is third year. So I'll open the discussion and then entertain a motion. Just spending, just spending.
spending or revenue? What do you ask?
Revenue,
Revenue, but revenue means spending. If you
spending ceiling.
Unfortunately, yes.
It goes up 2.2, that's what it means.
It means something
in a
different to me in
perfect world, in a
business,
perfect
but yes, it means something to the county, that means spending.
Holly, in your presentation, you mentioned uncertainties a lot. That 2.1% factors in all those uncertainties that you talked about.
It's actually part of that, let's put it that way. So in other words, for example, it still includes $4 million, which is about half of what we could maximize, realize from the federal tax law change on that. So that's $4 million. If we're lucky, we could be a little bit higher, but that could end up being lower than that as well. So I factor in some of the risk, but the uncertainty, I address the part of that based on my best guess.
Yes.
I just want to make a general comment. It seems like the adults are back in charge of the financial aspects of the county. And I want to congratulate you guys and the school system. I mean, the non-transparency from a few years ago, I'm glad it's gone. And ignoring some of the buildup in the authorized but unissued debt the first year we showed up in here was frightening. I just want to congratulate you guys. Thanks for doing the job.
The other,
And I say $0, by the way. I'm just throwing it out there. For help? No, yes. All the way down the line.
I would entertain that. Because it's entertaining.
Well, it's not really a floor. I'm saying negative now. I'm going negative bond additions.
So I'm not going borrowing, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can recommend, I mean, assuming we've got the best and brightest, 2.2% seems like the right number. See how we can change.
the only thing that changes is the increase in taxes, increase in revenues. I mean, that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
That's-
I mean,
The other, yes?
But just to back that, the budget shortfall for this year, does it make sense to kind of build that into the increase, though, if we're actually going to be short this year? So rather than being 2.2%, if we reduce that by the 15 that the budget is short this year, to
We
go
already
from
did.
actual,
When we develop FY19 revenue, we go from the estimated level of FY18. That's how we resolve the number on that. The number percentage was shown is just for illustration purpose from the prior year. But when we develop, we're not starting from FY18 budget. We started from estimated level, so that's already counted.
and there is no use of reserves to get to that estimated level?
No, we're not using reserve. We're cutting back expenditures to stay within the revenue.
They cut our per diem here.
By the way, that's why you don't have printouts.
It's going to go back up. But what you have to recognize in that is that the kinds of savings that you implement in order to cut back by 2% for the last quarter are one-time pieces when those jobs are now filled in the succeeding year as opposed to being met by temporary or by a freeze, that changes the whole picture. I just have to say personally, I think that given the uncertainty over what's really going to happen with taxes, the fact that not just at the local level, the APFO changes haven't been factored in here, but the pending legislation at the state level hasn't been looked at either. We might want to be more conservative than where we're standing right now. I'm not saying zero, I appreciate that twice, but
You're somewhere between 0 and 2.2.
somewhere between 0 and 2.2, yeah.
Other,
That's a good point about the one-time savings, though.
Yeah, they're artificial.
other members, so I can see. Well, we have, what would you have as a number? You said it should be less than.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the 85 represented that we recommended, what the bank recommended last year.
No, okay, but no, not borrowing, just on.
Revenue.
On revenue.
Revenue.
There we go, that's better.
Okay, somebody is saying something.
Lower.
Oh, we're gonna lower energy costs, and then that way we'll save.
1.75.
I don't think, 1.75 isn't a bad idea. Just because, I just think the other thing is that there's a lot of stuff happening in the legislature in terms of the lockbox for education and things, which unfortunately are good for education, but diminish what will be available statewide to fund other pieces. So, and it's not gonna come to us in large number because we're at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to getting increases, where the monies most likely will be directed are in counties that are in real distress. And so, but it's gonna pull away from other stuff that might fund, and whatever happens out of the Cohen Commission in terms of additional recommendations. But the fact that there are not just local bills, but state bills looking at how certain fundings are going to be managed, and the uncertainty of the federal tax picture and what that means about state and local revenues and how people are gonna do this, and what the reaction will be from the state in order to reduce the burden, which is gonna reduce the revenues that are available for distribution. I just think we should be conservative, so I like Barbara's 1.75.
1.75, and we have 2.2, which is what
It's at least worth considering.
I always get that. Other input, please? Questions?
I'd say the 2.2.
Well, we will.
He can still go over, he can still go over.
Yes.
No, I know,
I agree with Bruce, I would stay with Holland's number.
I just think, the county, what we just saw in APFO, what we just, this county doesn't understand what's happening. And so, if we recommend, I'm not saying it's not financially sound to say 1.75, but it's illogical in relation to what's happening in the economy, and it's illogical in relation to what people think. So the ultimate, when you go to 2.2, and 21 million is already at the school board, and that ain't gonna be shortened by a whole lot, you're gonna shrink the county and services. And I just think it's not.
But at some point, how do we begin to influence how people think? I mean, in other words, if they continue to think that they will get what they ask for, or a significant part of it, how do we begin to change that culture?
Well,
Because
that'll be the next piece that we're going to talk about. That's how we communicate, and well, Jim, and how we've tried. I think we made a couple large steps last year to get out what we're talking about into a larger discussion in the community. Because if you look at AFO and the other discussions, they're not about, they could be more focused on the actual impact, and that's not easy, because I don't know what the impact is.
but revenue does mean spending, as a statement that was made earlier. So I think it does send a message.
Well, I think by just having the conversation in here, this transparency, that is changing culture. So because now we're having those difficult conversations already. It's never been had before to this level. So I think nobody's glozing over anything anymore. We're discussing that we're looking for serious solutions that will help mitigate this from happening in the future.
I understand what you're saying, but we sat here last year and we looked at what that's why we started talking about a structural deficit, because we had the same exact conversation last year.
Yeah.
We looked at the numbers, we could see what was happening. The requests that were coming in from the school system and everybody else was greater than anything we were estimating. So I think we've been trying to have the conversation for a few years. Maybe this is the year everybody starts to listen, I don't know. But it's becoming a bigger problem.
And Steve, it's not just last year, I mean, you know,
Oh,
three
exactly.
years ago, we were the bad guys that took,
Took
you
it
know,
down from 120.
took it down from 120.
Okay,
So we've been
we
at
took it
this
down from
for-
120, but the county
I mean,
used
we've been at this for-
135 million last year, so we can sit here and talk about the that goes
I'm
back
just
to
saying,
the
we've been at
long
this for
term.
years, yeah.
So I'm more focused on the spending problem than I am I mean, the debt problem is out there, maybe it's in my banker, I understand that you can leverage certain things, but it's the overall spending problem. It's just, but I think saying 1.75, Holly's got good numbers. She knows what they're looking at. That's just us saying, oh, well, we don't believe the analysis. I'm not saying I
No,
don't
no, but
believe the
she
analysis.
said it only includes some of the things. That's what I was saying. She said these numbers only include, you know, partial consideration for stuff because they were done before certain actions were taken. So we now at least know one action that was taken that may have an impact on growth, on revenue, and on need. So that's just, I just.
Well, we'll get to that, though, but we got a lot of things. Nope.
No, just for me, just very quickly, Holly, we use the term, and I never heard of it before, I came to Maryland, structured deficit. Is that really a liability?
You're not by yourself.
You're not
Is
right.
that-
No, it's, I don't want to raise taxes. It's the
Because if
same
it's a
thing.
liability, we should state it's a future liability.
It's not a future liability.
It's not a future
It's
liability.
not, it's just based on what people breathe.
That's what they want us to put in this report.
The service.
We think you need to raise taxes.
What actually happened on that, and
But
then
it's a
we,
statement.
as a starting point, then we will close that.
But it's not a liability.
It's not a liability, because when we say liability, it's just kind of legally have to fund on that versus what people want, so that's different.
Okay, once.
I'm not saying what you want is
what you
always
have to do is
unreasonable,
no.
but what you want is different from what you have to, and by law, you need.
Okay, this is last word, then we're going to actually get a count. Christine?
I appreciate Holly's number, I do, and I don't think our decision of to use it or not use it is in any way an indication of the work that your team has done. I like Barbara's number, because as Ralph Hughes said, there has to be a culture shift. And the only way for the conversation we have in here to be reflected is for us to go below that, to go below her number. I tend to be a little more conservative. I would rather go with a lower number. And then when reality happens, wow, isn't that great? Because I agree with Steve. We don't know what's going on. A whole other host of things. When I sat here and heard a presentation about how there are revenue sources that are basically being left on the table, something has to change. We have to change the way we're doing business. And I think we can help get that conversation started, but we have to have something come out of here that basically says, hey, look, they gave us 2.2, we really think we have to plan for this instead.
So you're going with understate and overachieve.
Yes,
I like that.
I think it's much better, because the other.
No, I'm not saying it's bad.
The other option is far more
Right.
dangerous.
Right.
And we get into the sense of complacency, and
Right.
it is not healthy.
No, no,
We need
no.
to change
Yeah.
the way we do business, or we are going to continue down a path we're not going to be happy about.
I think there's just too many uncertainties, but
Yeah.
and that doesn't take away from really an excellent presentation and good factual information.
No.
There's still too many unknowns.
The one thing we can be sure about with Holly and the present administration we've seen is they'll manage what they have. So that's some fiscal comfort, whatever it is. I need you, because I'm gonna put out, and we'll see what it does, and then we'll use it, 1.75 to 2.2, and you'll vote on one of them. I need you to collect this so we have a real count on this. Okay?
Do you want the staff, people to stay from the local county staff?
Yeah, I think county staff should abstain from it.
Just to make sure.
Greg, you get 6 votes.
I've never voted and I don't think so.
Okay, so if we can, yeah, so it's either 2.2 or 1.7.
1.75.
1.75.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You're a great person. Back wall.
2-2.
Okay. I'm moving around.
2.2.
1.75.
175?
175.
175.
175. 175.
Okay. Jim?
175.
You know,
175.
I
think the 2-2-1.
We shouted louder.
Now we know what the problem is.
Right, but I'm still trying to,
Wait a minute, what happened
I'm
on
trying
this
to
side?
reconcile.
Let's go
I'm trying to
back again.
reconcile the 0 to 2.2.
As a business person, I believe the top numbers by Holly, and I've worked on the bottom numbers. I just now understood you can't work on the bottom numbers. So I got that. But I still take the numbers.
But remember, the county executive has the option to move beyond this. This is a recommendation.
The county,
And
the county
for a
executive-
direction, it doesn't mean that it's
But we voted.
mandated.
It's 175. We voted. Right?
Okay.
Five to 0-0.
Okay.
176, come on.
We've got that piece. The next piece would be borrowing. We've gone from, again, it was 120, and I think it's, again, for our newer members, it's instructive that the 2 years before this group came into being, and a lot of them were carried, a lot of people didn't carry those. But you get 120 million for 2 years in a row. It was run by a really good person, but who was an employee of the county versus having a citizen running it. And it was 120 million because in the reality, because we could and money was cheap. That was what I heard. At the council level, when we went to present that year, those who presented with me, what we heard from certain council people, in their view, 120 million, it wasn't the justification, it's just because we can spend that much. And was the mindset. So we took it back to, I don't know, it was 95. Is that what you need to read? Give me 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
3 minutes.
Oh, that's it, okay. So, I'm going to cover it in 3 minutes. So we were last year 85 million. My point was, the money that we saved in relative terms allow us to look at the courthouse and that $120, $130 million and do it in a way that impacts long term. Because we had taken out $100 million of authorized.
Steve, I'm going to ask that you hold this vote till next week, just because I think we need to talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, we'll do that. I still need, Steve, if you can hang around.
Yeah, no, I'm saying for this committee, because there's more to talk about.
Okay, yeah, no, I think
In
this
2
is-
minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes is not a
Okay, so we will defer this to next week as well as other.
Yeah, and then Dr. Clinch is going to talk about the.
And that would be a good foundation.
And one, absolutely.
Great input from everyone.
I think Dr. Clinch's would help us with 175, but that's just my.
We're gonna do policy.
Almost wish you were here before we did.
We'll find something else.